Charles River Chamber. My thanks to all of you for joining us today for this program, which seems really well timed. I'm really glad that we're doing it today and appreciative of our guest who's going to walk us through this. First, my thanks to the Chamber's Environment Committee for advocating and putting this program together and helping us connect with Mal, and also to Cambridge Trust and InSource Services for sponsoring all of our Environment Committee programs. So while we're going on to the program, do go into chat and just say hello and let us know who you are, and let us know if you're an EV owner or not. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Mal Skowron from the Green Energy Consumer Alliance. Mal, good to see you.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, and really looking forward to your presentation. Mal will go through some slides and go through a couple different things, and then we'll invite you to submit your questions at any point during the Q&A, and we will get to those at the conclusion. So it's all yours, Mal.
Thank you so much. You should be able to see my screen now. Hello, my name is Mal Skowron. I'm the Transportation Policy and Program Coordinator for Green Energy Consumers Alliance, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about EVs. As Greg mentioned, the timing really couldn't be better with the high gas prices. More people than ever are considering making a switch to electric vehicles, and I'm here to talk a little bit more about what that decision might entail and important things you need to know and consider if you're in that position. If you're not familiar with Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we are a nonprofit organization based in Boston, Massachusetts, and our mission is to harness the power of energy consumers to speed the transition to a low carbon future. So what that means is we run a variety of clean energy programs to help move the needle on emissions and make it so that more people in Massachusetts and also Rhode Island, where we do some work, have access to affordable clean energy choices. So we have programs for clean electricity, a program called Drive Green, which I've worked on over the last 4 years to help educate and create access to more affordable electric vehicles. And recently in development, we're working on a heat pump program so that people who want to replace their existing heating system can have access to a clean system running on electricity. But again, today, the focus of our presentation is going to be electric vehicles, really an EVs 101 of everything you might want to know. So my goal today is to spend the first 10 minutes talking about the basics of electric vehicles and what's coming in the very near future. And then another 10 minutes on important things you might need to know or consider as a business owner or an individual thinking about getting an EV for a fleet that you operate, or if you are thinking about installing charging at your business for a variety of reasons, which we'll get to. And then the last 20 minutes, I want to dedicate to Q&A in the 5 minutes before the presentation started. I was getting some great questions already from the CRRC, so hopefully we can dedicate plenty of time to the good questions that you all have and spend a lot of time there. And my contact information is on the screen there, and it'll be on the last screen. So feel free, if we don't get to a question or you have something that you want to directly reach out to me about after today's presentation, you can reach me by email there. The first thing I want to emphasize as we get this presentation started is how much better electric vehicles are for the climate. I know that there's this sense that because we still have natural gas and fossil fuel electricity generating resources in our grid, that electric vehicles don't do that much to reduce emissions from transportation, and that couldn't be more untrue. The reality is that electric vehicles are a substantial improvement over gasoline. So you can see the screen there. The chart shows grams of carbon dioxide emissions for every mile driven in a car in New England. So based on the New England electric grid and the emissions associated with generating electricity. So you can see a gas-powered car emits about 381 grams per mile of CO2, and a fully electric car will shrink that down to just 84 grams. So it's about a 75% reduction, really big considering the scale of what the state's climate goals are. And it's worth noting that Massachusetts is on the path to making emissions from an electric vehicle totally zero by increasing our renewable electricity. So the cleaner our electricity mix gets, the cleaner electric cars will get over time. That's not something you can really say for gas-powered cars, which tend to not really change in their emissions, or sometimes they actually become higher emitting over time as the gas engine has some wear and tear on it and ends up being less efficient. And then in the middle there, a good in between is the plug-in hybrid, which if you don't know what that is, it's a vehicle that has a small battery that you can recharge at a charging station or using an outlet, but then also a full gas backup. So it's a good in-between option for people that want to drive most of their miles on electricity, but still would like the security of a gas engine as a backup. I happen to own one of those. It gets about 50 miles on the battery, and then it has a 300-mile gas tank, and I really enjoyed it. About 90% of my miles are able to run on electricity. But the other really important thing about electric vehicles that I think is on the minds of many people with the high gas prices right now is that they cost much less to fuel. So this chart compares the range that you might expect for vehicles of different fuel types. So all the way at the top there, you have all electric vehicles, which are not only the least expensive to fuel, they also have the most narrow range. That's because electricity prices tend not to vary as much over time because they're heavily regulated. And so you're not going to get the huge swings that you get with gasoline prices. If you compare that to the range of costs you might expect with a gasoline powered vehicle, you can see it can range all the way from $1,000 a year to $5,000 a year just for gasoline. And that's a function of two things: the yo-yoing gas prices that I think we're all painfully too familiar with these days, but also the fact that gasoline vehicles come in a wide range of efficiencies. So you can buy a 20 miles per gallon gas vehicle or a 50 miles per gallon gas vehicle, and that'll really change how much you end up paying in gas. All electric vehicles are very, very efficient. Even the big ones, if you look at a big electric pickup truck, which are coming on the market now, that has the equivalent of about 85 miles per gallon if you're looking at how efficient the electric powertrain is. So it's a much narrower range in how much you'll expect to pay in fuel costs. Stacked on top of that is the fact that EVs also cost less to maintain. Electric cars are simply much simpler machines. So they don't have transmissions, they don't have fuel lines or pumps or oxygen lines, none of the things that you need in order to combust gasoline fuel inside the vehicle. So that means there's less things that can go wrong and less things that need regular maintenance over time. Most electric vehicle owners only really report that they go in to rotate their tires every couple of years or get their windshield wiper fluid replaced, but that's really it. So you can dramatically reduce the maintenance costs of your vehicle by switching to an EV. And in the long run, if you plan on driving the vehicle until its very end, when the cost of repair isn't worth the cost of the car anymore, you're going to have fewer huge repairs over the lifetime of the vehicle, because again, there's no transmission and none of those mechanical issues that you would have with a gas-powered car if you're driving an EV. When you stack all those things together, the data shows that EVs are cost-effective when you compare them to the best-selling, top-rated, and most efficient cars in their class. So this bar chart shows some of the most popular electric car models that have been on the market for the last couple of years. And they'll show you how much you expect to save over the lifetime of the vehicle. And this includes things like depreciation and the resale value, maintenance, repair, fuel, and the upfront cost. So all of those things bunched together, you can see the savings are really high and will vary depending on the vehicle and what its gas-powered counterpart is. And I encourage you, if you want to dig more into the math on this, this graph is from a great report from Consumer Reports that you'll have access to after today's presentation. It's worth noting, so over the last 4 years that I've done this work, electric vehicles have just totally boomed in popularity. I think that's a function of a couple of things, but most importantly, the fact that automakers are now very serious about electric vehicle production. All of the major automakers, including Ford, General Motors, Hyundai, Kia, Volkswagen, are all spending more on increasing their capacity to produce and manufacture electric vehicles than they are on gas-powered vehicles. So you can see all of the tremendous commitments, both financial and aspirational, that they're making in order to produce electric vehicles in the next couple of years. Notably, these are things that can't easily be undone or rolled back according to the presidential administration or how federal elections go in the coming years. So that means that this is happening. The transition to electric vehicles is underway, and we're going to see way more options as consumers and better prices in the long run, which I'll talk about a little bit. But here's just a small scattering of some of the electric vehicles that are available now that can act as excellent replacements for a vehicle that you own or vehicles that you might see coming soon. So you'll note that there's electric vehicle models for cars in every class. So it's not just small sedans anymore. There are real tangible replacements for SUVs and pickup trucks as well. Particularly in the news, you might have seen that lately Ford has just started to get the Ford F-150 Lightning off of their manufacturing system, and they're trying to expand capacity to build more of those trucks as quickly as possible. My constant refrain here is for anyone that watched the Super Bowl this year, you might have noticed that there were more commercials for electric cars than there were for gasoline-powered cars. So it's just a small peek into what's coming, but pretty soon there are going to be models that meet every driver's needs. So if you've been holding back because there hasn't been an electric vehicle that is the right size or has the right features for you, that's going to be changing very quickly. And most importantly, it's not just Tesla anymore, which I know is a consistent concern for folks that have a brand that they're loyal to. But all of that doesn't matter unless electric vehicles are affordable to buy, right? So we know that already the cost savings of fuel and maintenance is making electric cars a good investment. But in order to really see the wide scale adoption that we need in order for the state to meet its climate goals, in order for this transition to what I think is a superior technology to happen, electric vehicles need to be cheaper upfront to purchase. And that is happening very soon. Over the last 8 years, battery costs have fallen about 80%, which is actually faster than the how much solar has dropped in cost over that same time period. So we're seeing tremendous improvements in battery technology that are making it so that pretty soon electric vehicles will be cheaper to buy than their gasoline-powered counterparts. That's going to happen in about 2026. I apologize, the graph there is in euros because a lot of the analysis is done in Europe, where they're just a little bit further ahead of us in terms of the EV market. But the supply chain is global. This is a global industry. And so 2026 is really the day that we're looking at, or the year that we're looking at, where gas-powered cars are going to have a much harder time competing. And we see that shift happening, not just globally, but in Massachusetts specifically. So this data is from since, I think, 2013, that shows how many electric vehicles have been registered in Massachusetts. That number is steadily increasing. And we expect that as these more models come out, as costs continue to decline, and as people are getting fed up with high gas prices, this popularity of EVs is going to be faster and faster. So there was a big jump between 2020 and 2021, and I would expect that you're going to continue to see those big jumps in EV adoption as people make the switch to electric cars. And what's really relevant for this group is that the greater Boston area, so this is done by county, Middlesex, Norfolk, Worcester counties, around the Boston metro area tend to have the highest concentration of EV sales in Massachusetts. So this shift is not just happening across the state, but also specifically targeted in your community. I'm sure you've all seen more EVs over the last couple of years. Seems like we have plenty of EV drivers in the group with us. That's only going to get faster, specifically in the Charles River area. So I'm going to shift to the next part of the presentation. Is hopefully I've provided you with enough data and information to convince you about how this transition to electric vehicles is coming. But what I'm going to focus on next is what you might want to know or consider as you think about preparing for this transition. The key thing is about electric vehicle charging, which is really the focus here. And so in case you don't know, I think it's important to start with the basics. There are 3 levels of EV charging, or 3 speeds, you could say. The first is level 1 charging, which can be done using a regular household outlet and a charging cable that comes with every electric car that is sold. That'll give you about 2 to 6 miles of range for every hour that you spend plugged in, which is pretty slow. But this is primarily done at home or places where cars are parked for a very long time and can sit and take that charge while you go about your day. So it's not like you're sitting there waiting for the car to charge at a very slow speed. It's typically done somewhere where the car is parked for a very long time. Level 2 charging is what makes electric vehicle ownership a little bit more practical for most people, depending on the model of the car, whether it's a plug-in hybrid or a fully electric vehicle. It'll add about 11 to 25 miles of range for every hour that you spend charging. And so what that means is for a fully electric vehicle, you can get a full charge overnight with a level 2 station. So this is how many people charge their cars, either at home. You can install a specialized unit at home or out and about in public. This tends to be the type of charging station you'll see at municipal lots or businesses or other areas where you want to attract people and you want people to spend a couple hours of their time while their car charges. The last speed of charging is DC fast charging, or level 3. That is really meant for support on long distance road trips or emergencies. So when you need a charge much faster in a shorter period of time. The typical station will give you about 90 miles of range in 30 minutes of charging, but that can really vary depending on the temperature and how much charge you already had in your battery when you plugged in, and the car itself. So 90 miles in 30 minutes is really on the slow end, and you can get much faster rates of charging with higher powered stations, which are being installed soon, and also all the exciting new vehicles that are coming out that can charge much faster. You'll note that Tesla stations, which are famous for their wide-ranging network of charging stations, can charge, I think, like 200 miles in 45 minutes or less. And so that's really where the industry is going, is those much faster charges. The key thing about charging that I think most people fundamentally don't understand is that it is totally different than refueling with gas. And what I mean by that is if you drive a gas-powered car, the way you probably refuel it is you go once a week or whenever you're running low, and you spend 10 minutes to go on a detour out of your way to get to the gas station. You fill up, and then you don't think about going back until you're close to low again. Charging is different because it's done much more incrementally. People charge mostly at home to refill the miles that they've done in a day, and it's much more opportunistic. So you're going home to plug into your garage, and you're just going to recharge the miles that you drove that day. Or you have an errand to run, you're going to go to the grocery store, and so you stop by and there's a charging station, so you charge while you're at the grocery store. Even if you're at 50 or 60% battery power, you might do that just because it's available. And so that's really the model for charging, is it's more frequent, done for shorter periods of time, but just kind of at home or out and about. And so here on the screen, I have a couple of examples of charging stations In the Newton, Wellesley area that exemplify really all of the use cases for charging stations and where we're going to see them expand for people to use them more often. So the number one way that electric vehicle drivers charge at home now, or charge is at home now. And that's because it's really easy if you have a garage or if you have a single family home, and cars spend a lot of time parked there. But as there are going to be more EV drivers, and as more of those drivers don't have easy access to charging at home, then charging stations around town, at workplaces where cars also tend to spend a lot of time, typically the entire workday in one place, or just out and about and shopping centers and major large parking lots, that's going to be more and more important. And specifically relevant, I think, to this group is the fact that EV drivers are going to shop, eat, and stay at businesses that offer charging. On the screen there is a really fun example of one of Green Energy Consumer's EV ambassadors. So this is someone who lived in Massachusetts and drove a Chevy Bolt and volunteered his time to talk to other people about his experience making the switch to an electric car and how he was able to charge in public stations around Massachusetts. And so he recently took a long road trip all the way to Colorado in his electric car. And the entire experience was, he stopped at a charging station to charge for 40 minutes and went and got lunch at the restaurant right next to the charging station. Or there was, in the example there, a cafe where they had charging. So that's where he stopped to eat on his long road trip. So more and more, that's going to be very relevant because EV drivers are going to go where the charging is. And that's not just true for those long distance trips, but also around the town trips. So if you have a decision between two grocery stores or two businesses that you might go to, you're gonna spend the time at the one that has EV charging. And so that's really where the key opportunity for businesses is gonna be, I think, is to continue to attract people who own EVs and also retain and attract employees who want to be able to charge at work. So it's a vital amenity, and it's not typically something that businesses have had to think about or worry about. You don't dispense gas currently, right? So it is a bit of a paradigm shift in thinking about how this is going to change over time. But again, it is a huge opportunity. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the cost of installing charging stations or thinking about installing charging stations either for your employees or tenants or just to support an electric vehicle that you might be considering to replace an existing gas-powered car in your fleet. And so the costs really vary depending on the site. It's almost impossible to say with any type of certainty how much a charging station installation is going to cost unless you have a licensed professional to take a look and provide those estimates. But a good rule of thumb is it's about $6,000 if you were just to install one port, and that number declines quite considerably if you install more at any given time. There are incentives, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but the costs can also vary according to whether you have existing service close to where you want the charging station, or if that's going to have to be added. Costs are going to be a little bit higher if you'd like to have a networked smart charging station so that people can find it easily, compared to just basically what we call a dumb plug, which is a charging station that doesn't have any network connectivity whatsoever. So there are lots of options in terms of, what kind of functionality you might want, whether you want to recoup the costs of installation by charging a fee for users of the charging station. You can really get deep into the weeds here, but I just wanted to kind of briefly present this as, there's lots of decisions to be made according to what might work best for your site. But there are experts every step of the way that can help you answer these kinds of questions if you are thinking about it. And I will note before I move on, it's always least expensive to install charging if you're already trying to do a major renovation or changing something about your site. So a parking lot resurfacing, for example, is a great time to install a charging station because a lot of the cost comes with soft permitting and construction management costs, and also just the cost of having to rip up concrete or asphalt to put new conduit in. So if you can kind of pair a potential installation with other work that you're planning on doing anyway, that is really the best way to minimize cost. That being said, there are plenty of incentives out there to help businesses do this work. Because charging stations are an absolute vital tool to help increase EV adoption for the state to meet its climate goals. And if you haven't heard, there's a mandate to reduce climate warming emissions. And so the state is very interested in supporting forward-thinking businesses that can or are interested in installing charging. So there are also incentives if you are interested in replacing one of your existing fleet vehicles, if you have those, to an electric model, both for light duty cars and medium and heavy duty trucks. So vehicles of all sizes really now have electric options, and the rebates can help you defray some of those upfront costs so that you can access the fuel and maintenance savings much sooner. And then on the screen there, which I'm not going to go through each one because I think it's worth kind of clicking around when you have the opportunity if you'd like to learn more about how the incentives work. But the basic idea is that the utility company is now expanding its offerings to be able to support the installation and equipment costs for EV charging. Those programs still haven't been approved, but they're going to be sometime this summer. And so pretty soon there's going to be a large pot of money to help businesses and other property owners install charging. Even if those programs fill up quickly, which I think they will, but they're just getting started out. Massachusetts has plenty of existing programs as well for both fleets, workplaces, and public access stations, which depending on your situation, you might want to use a combination of, or just one of them to be able to help finance your EV charging infrastructure. And I know I went a little bit over, but here are more resources that you'll have to learn more, and I'm available to answer questions by email and the rest of today. So yeah, looking forward to the question section of this.
Thank you, Mal. Much appreciated. You really covered a lot of ground there, so thank you. Couple questions for you. First, level 2 charging stations. Do I need an electrician to install those?
Yes, so it's typically a pretty simple installation depending on what the site looks like. But if you're talking about installing a charging station at, let's say, a garage or some area for supporting fleet vehicles, you would need an electrician basically just to make sure that you have the room on your circuit board to be able to install the station. And then it's a really simple, just upgrade an outlet to 220 volts, plug the station in, you're good to go. If you're thinking about a station that would be used publicly, so it needs to be kind of like cemented in the ground, and then at a parking lot, for example, still need an electrician to do that work, to scope it out. And then also there's some contracting work involved there to add service to a site to make sure that you have the supply close to where the electricity is being used. So yes, always need an electrician, always a good idea to have that expertise. And if you look into the incentives that the utility and the state offer, they typically have a list of well-experienced, qualified electricians that can help you do all that work.
Terrific. And talk a little about the technology for those businesses that want to charge their customer, whoever, to use the charging station. How does that work? What are the options? How do you shop for the right one?
Yeah. So any station that has the ability to be connected to a larger network or Wi-Fi connected is able to have its prices managed by you, the site operator. So there are a few companies that tend to specialize in these kinds of stations, ChargePoint and NL being the most popular ones. And so they'll have a conversation with you about, how much you want to charge, what other customers that are similar to you have done in the past. Then you can make decisions about, like, I really would like people just to be attracted to my business as an amenity. And so I'm willing to cover the cost of charging, and you can set it as, totally free. But most charging station operators tend to put a nominal fee on the cost of charging just to manage demand. So it's typically 20 or 25 cents per kilowatt hour, which tends to match what our current electric rates are, but it can be higher or lower depending on whether you want to have people charge and then move out of the space, because that's an option as well. Is you establish a fee that's based on time rather than energy, so that you encourage people to use the station for as long as they need it and then move so that someone else can get in there. So that I don't expect every business owner to kind of know exactly what the right solution is for them. But if you pick a smart networked charging station, then you have those options available to you.
And a smart network situation will tell the user where a station is and whether it's available or not, whether it's being used or not.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's really great tools out there that help EV drivers locate where charging stations are on the map. And so you can put smart network charging stations are the easiest to find, but a simple dumb plug, as you might call it, can also be put on the map. It's just typically harder to find, and when it's not part of a network, you can't control the prices in the same way that you can with the much smarter advanced models. So I would recommend probably going with the smart option. But if you're just charging vehicles for your own uses, then maybe a simpler charging station might make more sense. But all of those options are laid out when you look further into the utility programs and start to figure out what a site installation might look like.
Terrific. All right, so here's a long question. I serve on the board of a condo association, and there is strong support of our building to add EV charging. We're stuck on who pays what here, as the activation benefit will last long into the future. Furthermore, different space owners are different distances from the electricity source, creating different installation costs for different owners. Told you it was long. Have you seen different residential buildings work around this problem? What state level resources are available to help us?
Yeah, that's a great question. Really the $1 million question. I would say there's still not a great statewide model for condos, specifically because the issue that you laid out, which is there's not one property owner or decision maker who can choose to make the investment on behalf of every other tenant in the building. So as the counter example, I live in an apartment building where the management decided like charging stations are something that we want to offer, and they made that investment. Condos, as you noted in the question, very different because you have lots of different stakeholders that are, individually responsible for any upgrades that need to happen. And also every condo is different, right? Maybe you have an assigned parking space, maybe you don't, in which case those would be two totally different situations for installing public chargers that anyone can use. If you don't have assigned spaces, then there's the matter of making sure that everyone is on board all at the right time. And I'll be totally honest, incentives in the state have been lacking in support for condos specifically. There just haven't been as many as there have been for apartment buildings. So I'm hoping that this next round of utility programs will be able to address the condo situation, because as long as people are confused about who's on the hook for what prices, then it's going to continue to be an issue. But if the overall cost can be lower, then it's an easier sell. So I would say keep an eye out for those utility programs from Eversource that are coming. You might be able to find an option there. But in terms of what the right way to manage that installation is, that's something we're looking into at Green Energy Consumers. But rest assured, you're on the leading edge of the issue. And if you find out a great model for it, let me know, because I'd love to learn more about it.
So, and I think some of the programs you're talking about are proposed in the Senate Energy Program, not in the House bill, which is in a conference committee. So we'll have to see which ones come out where. Here's a comment from someone, I think more than a question. Please mention that making overnight level 2 charging stations available to developmental residents will be key to EV adoption. Don't forget planning for required utility electricity support to the development. All right. Next question. Are most charging stations free to use? I think you covered this a little bit. So you own an EV. How often can you go find free charging opportunities for yourself?
You know, I've owned my EV since the fall of 2019, and it's definitely gotten harder over time as there are more EVs. And so free charging seems to be disappearing, or at least more and more people are deciding to put a nominal fee on it. But I would say it really is about 20 to 25 cents per kilowatt hour. That probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you in terms of fuel costs. So I'll translate it to this really handy metric that the Department of Energy has put together called the e-gallon. So it takes electricity prices and converts to what you would pay for the equivalent amount of gas. So typically a charging station that charges you, let's say 25 cents for every kilowatt hour that you charge is equivalent to about $2.25 of gasoline prices. So it's really competitive, and it does help the site operator defray some of the operational costs that you incur by, having an electric load, a commercial electric load nonetheless on your property. So it's not going to be the thing that makes charging station, it's not going to pay for itself in the foreseeable future. So definitely don't go into it thinking that you can recoup your costs on that. But it is a good way to make the charging station at least float a little bit better, and there are more incentives that are coming, and hopefully some, again, utility programs to design special rates for electric vehicle chargers so that you pay a fairer rate, basically. Those are in development. I'm working on providing feedback on some of those programs right now, but I would say there are fewer and fewer free charging stations, and your best chance of encountering one probably will be at a state or municipal property. So a municipal lot, a town center, something operated by the state, but otherwise generally have to pay a small fee.
Great, thank you. Last call for questions, just a couple left here. How can we shift the changing mindset build out from the gas station model, high-speed chargers, to slower charges at home work? How can we get the right to charge and enough charging spots at rental housing?
That's a great question. So I'll just speak from my own experience as an EV driver. And I guess, like my car takes both gas and electricity, so I have a little bit of both under my belt. But I would say the case for charging at home or at work makes itself once you get used to it. It's much more convenient for me to get home and then just plug my car in, as opposed to having to make that consistent detour to the gas station. So I think for many people, it's not just a cheaper option, but a more convenient option. Once you think of, oh, this is exactly how I charge my smartphone, or this is how I charge my laptop, any other electric appliance applies to the way that people think about EVs once they kind of get over that initial anxiety of like, this is really different. So the case on some level will make itself. I think a big part of it is education and seeing stations out where you would want or need them. I'll say, not a lot of people recognize a charging station when they see it, because we're used to, huge signs that display gas prices and fuel prices, and you really clearly can always see the closest Shell or Exxon station. But whereas EV charging stations are small, they're typically discrete. That you could easily confuse one for a parking meter, right? If you're not looking. And so just being able to see more coverage and having them be in more places is going to make people feel comfortable. Like, yeah, I can switch to an EV because there's the charging station at my local town center where I can always go for a charge, and that is going to do a whole lot to help move the needle forward. That being said, people are choosing EVs even kind of without having that security. Like, that's why we have 50,000 electric cars on the road in Massachusetts, even with a relatively small charging network. But there's lots of federal money coming to help build that out. So the more that you can participate in that and use that to fuel your business or have an asset for your business, that helps move the needle forward, just that tiny bit that's needed to help people feel more comfortable.
Are you seeing more level 2 or DC fast chargers being installed at retail and shopping centers, or one or the other?
Yeah, I would say definitely level 2 is the most popular. I've only ever used level 2 stations because that's what my car uses, but they're also much less expensive, right? So I think that, as time goes on, we may see really large companies, specifically close to highways or highway corridors, start to make the movement towards installing DC fast charging stations. I know places like Walmart or Bank of America have really put a lot of money into installing those stations on their properties, but really for local businesses that are just trying to do the right thing for the climate and offer a service to their customers or tenants, are going with the level 2s. It makes people feel more comfortable. It's really often the leap that people need to see to feel comfortable, and it's an easier upfront investment to make.
So if I'm a business, I might want to think twice before I do the level 3s because some customers couldn't use them.
It's just because I drive a plug-in hybrid.
Okay.
So those are designed to have gasoline as the backup on long road trips. But for the most part, yeah, if you have the capital and desire to install a level 3 charging station, that's great. It's just, it tends to be more overwhelming as an option because of the higher cost. So I talked about level 2 charging costs as $4,000 to $6,000 per port. For a DC fast charging station, it could be on the order of $50,000 per port. So it's a significant increase, and there's federal money to help bridge the gap a little bit, but the level 2 station, I think, accomplishes a lot with a much smaller investment.
So, a question about the grid. Everybody's worried that there's not enough electric supply to handle everything that's coming down the road. Does that worry you? Does it keep you up at night?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't keep me up at night. I think there are lots of experts at the utility company and at the regional level managing the grid who are seeing EV numbers climbing and are preparing for it. I mean, that's why Eversource has been on the forefront of helping to install charging stations, is because they see where it's going and they want to be prepared. So for the average person that, is just kind of concerned that we don't have the infrastructure, I have no doubt in my mind that we'll build it out in time. It's not going to happen all at once. There might be bumps in the road where I've heard, some sites aren't eligible for utility incentives because there's larger substation upgrades that need to happen in order to support those charging stations, and they can't stretch the incentive dollars to cover those larger costs. But our electric grid needs more investment anyway, right? That's how we're gonna be able to support more heat pumps as well. It's coming. It's just gonna happen, with lots of planning over time. And I've seen that planning in real time, and I'm not worried about whether it's actually gonna happen or not.
We haven't found a question yet that we've been able to stump you on. 2 more, I think. So the rebates. Do the rebates, are they limited to certain kinds of cars? In other words, can you get electric or a rebate on a luxury EV, or is there a cap on what the price is?
Great question. Yeah, so the current incentives in Massachusetts are limited to cars with a purchase price of $50,000 or less. And so that covers,
high, right?
Sorry, say that again?
That's still pretty high then.
Still very high, but it does cover lots of vehicles not in that luxury segment. You can certainly buy vehicles more expensive than that, but most vehicles are under that. So it's not super limited. And I'll note that for incentives for fleet vehicles, for medium and heavy duty types of vehicles, so cargo vans, box trucks, big, huge semi-haulers, vehicles that you wouldn't think there are electric options, those are coming, and incentives are eligible for those vehicles as well. And I don't think there's any income or cost cap on those, and the incentives are much larger because the vehicles are more expensive. So it's scaled according to the size of, whether you're buying a cargo van or a big box truck. but it can significantly affect what the purchase price of the vehicle ends up being in a way that makes the ink work out much better if you're doing the math. Yeah.
Sorry, last question, I think. So from a user perspective, is it more cost effective to use a level 1, level 2, or level 3 charge for your cars, or is one more efficient?
Yeah, that's another great question. So we as residential electricity consumers don't pay by power consumption, we pay by energy. So what that means is you're really paying to fill up the battery. It doesn't matter how quickly it takes, at least on the residential side as a user. So charging very quickly at level 2 costs the same as charging very slowly at level 1. Commercial electricity prices work a little bit differently, as you might know if you pay a bill like that, but commercial users are paid by peak demand. So what's the total amount of power that they used at a site? There's a special fee related to that peak power demand. So you as the operator may see different costs depending on, if 10 level 2 charging stations are plugged in at once versus 1. But the utilities are working on proposals to help address that issue so that the costs are more consistent regardless of how many people are actually using your station. So that I can say with certainty is there's some iteration of that is going to be approved, and there's going to be special electric vehicle rates to make those costs more consistent.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I think we're all a lot smarter now than we were 45 minutes ago. So really, really appreciate it. Thanks to you and the Green Energy Consumer Alliance, to everybody who paid attention and joined us today, and to Cambridge Trust and InSource for sponsoring. We will send everybody who registered a link, so you'll have the slideshow and the various links that are included in there. Thanks everybody for participating, and Mal, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thanks again, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any other questions.
Terrific. Thank you very much, everybody.